In this video, I'm going to be going over the Dark Trio main characters, Yuji, Gabimaru, and Denji. Essentially, I'm pretty much going to be going over why I think all three of them are good, and how I rate them, and which one do I think is better, who's the best overall in my opinion. Not factoring in action, this isn't power scaling, so that's just a reminder, because clearly Denji's destroying all of them. So let's go ahead and get right into the video. Might as well start off with Yuji. Now Yuji, to me, out of all three of these guys, has the most unconventional style of development. Because for one, the way he's used, he's really not used as much as Denji and Gabimaru, obviously, because we go through a nice chunk of just Itadori just not being there, and it's really because he just fulfills his purpose in the story, which is how JJK is written. You really don't get Itadori guiding us through the story every arc. A lot of the time he's kind of playing off other characters, but he's still a central point of the entire story or whatever plot point that we need to get through. Because if we just look at how he's used in Shibuya versus how he's used currently in like the Culling games, it's vastly different, but the approach is a lot the same. He goes through a ton of ups and downs in terms of whatever arc it is, whether he's learning how to use curse energy more, learning about how to really fight and reinforce himself. Sometimes we'll go through arcs where it's really just how he is as a character. Like I think how it was when he first met Akari, that was very much character centric and it wasn't anything about the fight. And a lot of his ups kind of come with a lot of downfall, or they're not exactly the victories or the W's you would think would be. Because a lot of them can either be bittersweet or, yeah, he gets these big moments, but right after that he might get a big downfall because it's setting him up for something even bigger or more important, I would say, down the line. Which, if you're someone who's used to, let's say, like I'll just go old school, like a Naruto or even like a Yusuke, you're kind of used to him getting those characters getting those big shining moments. But now you look at a character who, he's really not a character you would look at and think, oh, he's gonna defeat the big bad. A lot of the times we really look at Yuji to just kind of figure out how is he gonna intervene himself into all this and how is he gonna win or at least help someone. And going off him just being a really good support character at times, I think his whole philosophy of, first of all, he goes from, I want to give people proper deaths, which is something that in hindsight is kind of selfish in a sense, because yeah, he's not trying to be the strongest or the greatest, but he's kind of pretty much giving people the best direction to death, quote unquote. Then fast forward now and he's in a cog mentality mindset, which is basically, he doesn't necessarily view himself as someone who would, oh, I'm going to do this for you, I'm going to give you the best death possible. He's really just there to just fit whatever he needs to do. He's a role player. I think that's the best way to describe him and how he views himself, but even then he really devalues himself as a character as a whole. I think the cool part about that is eventually we're going to get Yuji kind of snapping out of the cog mindset. At least that's what we all presume is going to happen. And I think that's going to be a great moment, especially since we've seen him go up and down. He's had times where he's happy and he's had times where he was confident. Then the next minute, it's all downhill. So I think whenever he is used in that fashion, it's really different. And I think I really like the unique approach to him. The only downside is I do see, like, for example, if you're not like an avid reader of the series, but you are caught up, kind of like you're reading a lot of things, but it's not your favorite, you probably wouldn't really necessarily view Yuji as a good main character, simply because he's not the main focus of the story 100% of the way, and he's not someone who's at the focal point of the story every single time. Sometimes you might not see him for 10-15 chapters. I think from a fan perspective, that's like the one downside of him. Plus, unlike his other two contemporaries, he's never been viewed as the strongest or even one of the strongest characters in the series. He's barely cracking the top 10, and I think that's something that also kind of drags him down a bit in terms of just the regular person. They just view him as a good kid, but I believe on the internet, Gojo is probably the most popular character, and part of that reason is because he's insanely powerful. He's cool as hell. But then look at Yuji as the main character. It's like, ah man, it's very different. So it's kind of a double-edged sword sometimes with stories like that. And I think in contrast with the cast, I think he's used phenomenally. We all know his dynamic with Mahito is one of the best in New Gen. His dynamic with Megumi and Nobara is really good, even though it sucks that when all three of them together, it really doesn't last that long. And of course, Sukuna, I think we all know that's a fantastic way to how they even started the story with him being such a contrast and a different side with Sukuna, and then Sukuna being pure evil. Then you got Yuji, who's not selfish. Sukuna, who is completely selfish, is really fire. I think Gege uses Yuji really good with the other cast members really well. Now, obviously, spoiler warning for Hell's Paradise if you're not caught up in the manga. Just letting you know, you've been warned. Now for Gabimaru the Hollow, ironically, he is the most traditional style written character out of the three, and that's pretty much because he's written linear. He doesn't really go or stray off into any direction. We kind of know where he's gonna go and how he's gonna be as soon as we see how his emotions kind of change around Sagiri and how he acts in his development. But it's still really good because of just how in depth you really get into the mindset of Gabimaru as he goes through these trials and tribulations and trying to get his wife back. I've always kind of looked at Gabimaru as like a shonen protagonist, but he's also kind of written and very similar to a lot of typical seinen protagonists. Obviously, I think the best comparison would be someone like a Thor. You know, guys who are kind of viewed as monsters, or they're really focused on the battle and the action part of the character. But once you later get down to their development, they start to realize that it's really important on when to take action, when to use your words, when to use emotions, and etc. And I think you see a lot of that in a lot of important seinen characters. Obviously with others like Guts and Musashi Miyamoto, I always feel like Gabimaru kind of fit within characters like that, more so than a lot of his contemporaries in like Shonen Jump or Shonen Magazine. And I think the way that it's written as to how he's growing through himself, and really you see death is a very big aspect of him in terms of how he looks when he's actually getting ready to kill someone. That is the real start of him changing as an assassin, and I think they did that really well. And his usage in the story is very much, he's there a lot of the time. Now granted, Hell's Paradise to me has the best cast out of all three. It's, even though it's kind of close for me, it has the best well written all overall. He's still pretty predominantly in the story for at least 70% of it, and I think that's just as good with how well written the cast is used all around and the timing of when to use them, so that way he doesn't have to necessarily focus a chapter on a character, or maybe he could focus half on one and half on the other. And Gabimaru a lot of the time is a part of that, especially in the final saga, because he's there pretty much from start to finish. Not just getting to the meathead side of me, he is amazing to read on panel and in the anime. I think they do Gabimaru fantastic to like capture the savagery of how well and pinpoint he is at attacking and killing someone, especially with the ninjutsu. I love how they color the ninjutsu. I think that is one of the best parts and one of the more things you look forward to with Gabimaru more than anything, is just seeing him fight. I think with others in the cast, he's done pretty well in terms of who he actually interacts with and has different conversations or confrontations with. Obviously Sagiri has done really good. That's pretty much his right hand woman, and I like that they both kind of grow along each other. Sagiri being a samurai and Gabimaru and being more of a human. And then you got obviously Chobayaza, who they kind of have a rivalry, but they really don't. They kind of just butt heads a lot because they just do not see eye to eye. But I think it's really cool how they're kind of viewed as the top two strongest, and when they do go at it, it's really epic. And then with the little girl May, I think that's a really good way of also bringing out that soft side of him, to where he can kind of calm down his bloodlust. And the other part of his character that I thought was really well done, kind of clever, was how they brought his past back and kind of using his past against him in the final saga as well. Obviously with the previous Gabimarus that come back, and then you have his village coming into the story as well while he's trying to fight the Tenzin. It was so much going on and so much chaos, but it was Gabimaru who had the most to deal with. I thought that was one of the best or the better parts of Hell's Paradise, seeing Gabimaru take on everything he's been through in different facets with this final arc. And of course, we got the wild child of the group, Denji. Now Denji is a mix. He's unorthodox and he's also traditional in terms of how he's developed. I think the best way to describe it is, we'll just use Denji touching Power's breast and comparing him to how it felt when he touched Makima. And we see obviously how he emotionally reacted to each predicament. It was very different. Now from a battle standpoint, he mainly gets better at finding weaknesses on devils, like the Santa Claus devil was weak to fire and light or whatever, so he lights himself on fire with gasoline and becomes a flaming chainsaw man to beat her. Denji starts from the ground up. Even though he's 16, he never had an education, so he's learning about manners, he's learning about human emotion, controlling his desires, doing what you need to do rather than what you want to do, things like that. And also valuing yourself. Don't treat yourself like a dog, you know, little things like that. And then even things like eating a meal every day, having somewhere to rest his head at night, means the world to him compared to other characters who that's just normal life for them. And as the Chainsaw Man, it's very normal but different, because he starts out strong as hell and eventually he gets to the point of where he's OP. He's top 3 in the verse or whatever, and in the most unpredictable and badass ways possible. he's just gonna figure out a way to keep getting stronger or clever ways to use his chainsaws. And also Denji goes through a selfish and selfless phase. Like when he could have went on the trip with Makima, obviously the girl of his dreams. Instead he stayed with Power, who was going through a heavy PTSD situation with the Darkness Devil. He decided to stay back with Power and make sure she was okay instead of going on that trip. That was great development from Denji. That was one of my favorite parts of Chainsaw Man when it comes to seeing Denji as a character grow. I think his dynamic with characters such as obviously Makima is probably the most entertaining one because it's so out of the box of how you view a Shonen Jump protagonist, and it's just extremely raunchy just in general. But she is the best antagonist to put against Denji. Aki and Power pretty much bring the best out of Denji. Even though Power isn't trying to, because Power kind of just inadvertently helps Denji grow. You got characters like Aki, who's he's the most sane, he's the most human character in the series, which is actually a downfall because of how he is fighting devils. So working with Denji, you see Denji also start to just learn things about the world and society also alongside Aki. And then you got someone like Kishibe, who in a way he does care for Denji in a sense, in terms of, hey, do not fall under Makima's spell that long. But he will also treat him extremely harshly because he is a demon at the end of the day. He is still a devil. He's half devil. So he gets that, yeah, this guy does care for me, but at the same time, he's beating the shit out of me. So it's a really funny dynamic. And then at the end of the story, when you get to see Denji growing with Naruto and Denji putting all his money and his hard work into making sure Naruto gets an education and goes to school, something he never had because that will put her on the right track, is a cherry on top of everything that we've seen from Denji from chapter 1. Let's just get into where I rank him and who I prefer. I'm not going to say who's the best because obviously it's opinionated. I mean, you might have something completely different. That's why we love opinions in the first place. Now, firstly, let's just go over Gabimaru. I actually have Gabimaru third. I love Gabimaru. I think the one thing that puts him back compared to the other two is that as good as he is, I always felt like as the story goes on, I always knew what to expect from him. And I really just started to get more interested into the other characters rather than he himself. And that's not a drawback, obviously, because if you get me invested in the other characters, I mean, it really just based off preference. Like, I'm a Chobe guy, and I also love Sagiri. I like Gabimaru, and I like Shin as well. Those are my guys. Those are my favorite characters. And really, the best of Gabimaru is through the end. I always felt like the middle part of Hell's Paradise, he was kind of in this stagnant area of where we're really just waiting for him to get that next step of his development, which puts him down just a little bit. He's still like an A-ranked character for me, but I think his start and his end is the best part, especially the start. I think he has the greatest beginning and introduction compared to the other two. Plus, he didn't really have the greatest foil or antagonist to really play off of or to strive against, so that was also kind of a notch against him. Now, 2 and 1 is very hard because I'm actually rereading Hell's Paradise and Chainsaw Man, and rereading Chainsaw Man, you really get to appreciate Denji's character a lot. So I'm putting him at the number 2 spot. And really, Denji is kind of the opposite. Denji, as the story goes on, he gets so much more interesting, and you really can't wait to see his conclusion as a character, especially whenever he finally gets to fight Makima, when he wants to get vengeance for Aki. How's he gonna react to sad deaths? All of this stuff that you really just cannot wait to see his reaction to. He's even gotten to a point as a main character where you don't really care to see him transform sometimes or see these serious moments. You really just want to see him interact and just be as goofy and stupid as possible. He probably has one of the better roads of getting to his conclusion as a character, even though he's not technically done yet because we got part 2. Although I feel like part 2 is more of a side character than he is the main character. I feel like the stretch of going from the Bomb Devil, then we get the Hell Devil arc with all the Santa Claus, and then you go into the Gun Devil, and then the finale with Makima and learning that she's the Control Devil and him breaking from the chains of her. It was amazing, and I can't wait to see that animated. I think a lot of people are going to gain respect for Denji, especially like the people who haven't read the manga. They're really going to appreciate how well written his character is. He's just a wild boy, let's just say that. And for my top spot, I put Yuji. I know it's supposed to be like no bias, but like hey, I'm being honest, I got him number 1, and it is relatively close. I'm not gonna say like he clears them. I think that's stupid, but I think I just got Yuji my number 1 because even though he doesn't have the focus or the driving force as much as Denji and Gabimaru, I think Yuji's story is so much mystery surrounding them, and we get these pieces and these information, this lore that helps almost bring his story together. You just can't wait to see how it ends because he's one of the few main characters that in recent memory where I genuinely do not know how his whole story is going to complete and finish, because we're at a point where it's either going to be really bad, not in terms of writing, but really bad in terms of how he's going to go out, or really surprising in where we know we didn't expect this, but it really makes sense because everything's finally coming together. We're learning about his backstory as when it comes to his family, learn about his connection to Kenjaku, the curse techniques that he's eventually going to awaken. His journey as a character has been such a roller coaster because we go through so many mixed emotions for him, and now we're at this point where it's only going to go up, and it only should go up for him. And as the story goes on, Yuji just gets more and more interesting to read. There's more things we can potentially learn about him. He fits with almost any character in the cast, and he's going to work with them in terms of the dynamic, whether it's dialogue or it's in a fight. He has one of the best fights in all of Nujin with him and Todo versus Mahito. The connection of him and Choso being technically half brothers, the antagonist that he has with Sukuna, how that works, and what's going on in the story right now, and how he's could be incredibly important in finally defeating Sukuna. The potential that was put on him from Gojo. I feel like there's just so many plot points with Yuji, and so many elements that it's hard not to put him at the top spot. And it's so, what makes it even more impressive is, even though he has more chapters than both of them, and even though he might not have as much appearance though, I just feel like Gege uses him almost perfectly and with purpose, where everything with Yuji matters at the end of the day. And to be able to do that with a main character that he constantly puts limitations on, I gotta give him his crown. That's how I feel about the Dark Trio protagonists. All of them are great. Don't get that twisted. I feel like they're honestly, even though Gabimaru is finished, I feel like those three in like the last 5 years have been three of the best protagonists to come out of anything shonen related, and all three of them are good. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Comment down below how you would rate the three, and I'll let y'all in the next one. Peace.